Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Storied Church podcast. My name is Jason, and I'm so glad you are here. Thank you for taking time out of your day to listen. If you're new and this is your first time here with us, I really hope you find your time with us meaningful. We would love to meet you and get to know you, and you can find a couple of ways to do that on our website at storiedchurch.org, at storied, STORIED, church.org, or you can find us on social media, and we would love for you to follow us on Instagram and or Facebook at Storied Church. We hope that our sermons and our ruminations are thoughtful and meaningful reflections that help us take our next steps together on our journey. Enjoy. Kids coming from everywhere. Speaking of kids, one of the things in church planting world, and also like in most churches that I've served, there has not been that many young kids, like kids under like 5 and 6, or 4. And the church would always be like, "Yeah, we want young kids," and I always felt like they wanted kids in their church, but didn't really want kids in their church because in some churches, and it's how I understand why in some churches you check your kid in, you drop them off, and then you don't see them till the end of the service. Which go them. That's their. We don't exist to because we think other people are wrong. It's a bad reason to exist. But one of the things for me as a pastor is I believe that faith formation from kids comes by seeing their parents in a worship space, in a small group space, and it's also intergenerational, kids interacting with other adults. I think those are the formational experiences. And I grew up in a church. This is the sermon before the sermon, so the sermon's coming. But I grew up in a church where I remember it wasn't a bad experience, but like I just remember church being incredibly boring. Like laying on the pew, when is this going to be over? Time just felt like it stayed still. I don't feel like that's what our kids feel like at this church. Last week, as we're playing the last song, the signs that you walk by, and hopefully will walk by as you leave this space today, maybe, like they were breaking down like, it's over, we're breaking down, like kids had the flagpole down. And part of it is like, okay, can you wait till like maybe 5-10 minutes after people leave? But then the other part of me just makes me so incredibly proud that our kids feel like this is their church and they're very much a part of it. And I know there is a kind, and Isaac even turned on the lights. Like, it's over, go home. And part of me, like, you know, you're conditioned, you want everything to go right and to plan, but it's the beautiful things that aren't a part of the plan that really, I feel like, especially this church, make it special. And so, not that I want a fire alarm, and not that I want the signs coming in it like, all right, get out, but it does, like, it makes me really proud of this church.
Their lesson from last week.
They
were living the lesson from last week.
Oh, yeah.
About
that's so true. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm.
And today they're going to be learning about curiosity, just like we will be learning about curiosity. So when in our society, we have these phrases that we use that when we say like we are more divided than we ever have been, and maybe that is a phrase that has come out of your mouth before in a conversation. And we also live in a society where there is so much toxicity and emotion within the division that we can't even begin to have a place of dialogue. And we probably can all name tables that we cannot really be our true selves or our full selves or have a full conversation. And so to live in this world right now and to exist in a way, we have to hide behind labels and sides. Are you a Republican or are you a Democrat? Or independent, but you know, which side are you on? Are you conservative or liberal? Are you pro-life or pro-choice? Are you pro-war, pro-military? Then that means you're patriotic. If you're pro-peace, it means you're unpatriotic and you're anti-military. If you're pro-LGBTQAI or anti-LGBTQAI+, you're pro or you're for. There's no like gray. Are you pro-government entitled programs or are you pro-cutting the debt? Are you pro-Israel? That's the new, or are you pro-Palestine? And we could go on of the sides that we have had to find ourselves having to take. And to be shrouded behind one of these labels with an immense amount of assumptions about what we believe and what our convictions are. Matthew 22 that Elaine read is one such scenario where they were trying to pigeonhole Jesus into choosing a side, to pigeonhole Jesus into a political ideology. And these two groups were strange bedfellows. You had the Pharisees and the Herodians, and they were under Roman occupation. And I never assumed that we're all like biblical historians in here, and I'm no doubt a biblical historian, as you might know in just a minute. But these two groups of Pharisees and Herodians kind of found themselves to appreciate the Roman occupation and kind of just live within the this oppressive system as a Jewish religious group. And the Pharisees were the opposite, who carried this ideology of like getting rid of the Roman occupation would come through a puristic, ritualistic revival. These groups had mutually opposed ideologies, but they had a common enemy, and that was Jesus. They couldn't stand him, and they would have loved to entrap him into speaking negatively against the Roman Empire, which would eventually lead him to his demise. So they got together to kind of pigeonhole Jesus into a political ideology and to see what he would say to them. I've thought about moments in my life where people have teamed up against me to get an answer or to come after me. Have you ever been teamed up against by people, or people have come together for a common cause?
Wait till your children get a little bit older.
I shall wait. But I remember a moment when I was in a town in Orange Beach, Alabama. I was an associate pastor, and that's where I feel like in that moment and season of life, I was going through the stage of of formation, to where I wasn't deconstructing per se. I wasn't so sure about this whole evangelical pray this prayer to get saved. I was kind of looking past of seeing salvation as like this more holistic thing. But I was a pastor at a church, a United Methodist church, that was very evangelical, that was very much put your head down, put your hand up, say this prayer so you'll go to heaven. And then it's like, all right, how many people said that prayer? And I was going through like, I don't buy that as much. And I wasn't like spouting that to people, but it was coming it was coming through. And I was the youth person, and the last person that was there was very evangelical, very, very much how many people got saved, whatnot, and then they got me. I think I just dashed their dreams, and so two of these kids came to me, and they were like, hey, let's go get Mexican food, and if you know me, Mexican food and cheese dip, I'm there. And so we went, and I thought, oh, here's a great opportunity. I'm all about relationships, and I'm all about like putting food in front of us. We'll get to know each other. And we sat down, and they looked at me, and they said, how do you become saved? And I thought, here are these two kids that know the answer to this question, and it was a test. How do you become, I want to make sure that this guy isn't a wolf in sheep's clothing. And it's like, in that moment, how was I supposed to tell these two high schoolers that I'm sorry, but that's a world that's crashing down in me right now? And I think I dashed their dreams, because what they wanted to hear is that you pray this prayer, you're saved, and I was coming to this place. I'm not so sure that that's the best avenue to follow Christ. And I could see it in their eyes. And I feel when I think about this text is that these Pharisees and Herodians are teaming up to go after Jesus because they want a response. They want to know, are you for or against? Whose side are you on? And Jesus, and there's a myriad of ways to interpret this, but this week I'm going in that Jesus responds to them in a way that is in the gray. He doesn't give them a clear black and white answer. And he says these words that Elaine read that many of us are familiar with: give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. There is some thought that Jesus might himself had been and aligned himself with the Pharisees. And if you read the Gospels and Jesus did not have an affection for the Roman Empire. But Jesus navigated this system just like everybody else navigated this occupation. And so this radical, I'm against the Roman Empire person, sometimes, whenever you would find Jesus in the temple, to get in the temple, you had to pay a temple tax. So if Jesus is inside the temple, Jesus paid the temple tax. Money that came from his purse to the Roman Empire was somehow transferred. And so what Jesus was displaying, if you go back to Matthew 17, Peter pays the temple tax. And Peter's like, should I pay it? Should I not pay it? I'm confused. And Jesus essentially says to him, like, if you're going to risk your life in this moment, this is not the time to risk your life. Pay it. And he has this weird story of like, go cast your line, get it out of the water or whatnot. But in this strange way, pay the temple tax. And what we realize from Jesus, who is so often, as we would probably put him in this ideological place, lived a life where he navigated how he lived and existed within his ideologies, that sometimes he didn't live out his ideology. Sometimes he was just cautious and worked and lived within the system. And I think when Jesus calls them hypocrites, to me, this is the hypocrisy that he is calling out, is that we so often carry ideologies that we ourselves hold to other people, but we know ourselves we can't physically exist and live in our world. That it wasn't so much that they said one thing and they didn't do it. The hypocrisy is that you have shaped your ideology so much so that it would be impossible for you to even exist in your world. And so Jesus invites them invites them to produce a Roman coin, which I think is brilliant, to say, I'm going to display whose side you are on. And then he asks them whose image is on that coin. And they say the emperor. And it was interesting, while they came to force Jesus to choose a side, Jesus implicated their side, which I think is somewhat embarrassing to them, that he revealed, despite whatever their ideologies and their religious conviction, that they were actually doing what he was doing, trying their best to live within this system, even with the ideologies, the values that they held. And what Jesus displays, and before these religious leaders, is that it is the reality that the ideals that we carry aren't that simple. Our values and our ideologies are shaped based on a lot of factors. Not just mine and yours, everybody's. Everybody's. We sometimes assume that it's just our own values, our own story that shapes our own ideologies, but it forms and shapes everybody's. Our religious upbringing, our schooling, our history, our families, our stories, all these moments form our perceptions of the world. And so what we come to believe about the world for which we live is very much contextual. And for Jesus, it wasn't simply about being pro-Jewish or pro-Roman Empire. For Jesus, there are some moments that aren't table-turning moments. They're just moments I got to get in the temple and get the job done and leave. And that Jesus is cautious. And some of us, including myself, sometimes have an issue with people, and even ourselves, when our ideologies don't really fit the fabric of our life. Because I don't think Jesus was condemning them for carrying a Roman coin. I think Jesus was exposing the reality is that they were living in the gray while using their mouths to say that they were living a black and white, for sure, convicted reality. I think sometimes when we read Scripture, it's easy for us to distance ourselves from religious leaders. Oh, get them, Jesus. Take them down. Those Pharisees and Herodians are bad people. And to cheerlead Jesus on. But I sometimes wonder when reading these texts if Jesus is also indicting us within this story, or if it works to our benefit to just go ahead and say, okay, where do I might do these things? That our expectations of the ideologies and beliefs we think each of us should hold. And here's where it gets somewhat complex. We are a progressive, we use that language, liberal. Probably say most of us are Democrats. If you're a Republican, leave now. Just kidding. We assume everybody, but that's actually a good thing to laugh at, because we assume that there are no Republicans in this church. Maybe not a good assumption. Or we assume that maybe everyone in this congregation is pro-choice. But are they? And you're probably, where is he going with this? Or if we are pro-choice, everyone is, to what extent? Or that everyone in this congregation believes in all the liberal progressive ideas. And I think the invitation of this text is to recognize that it isn't that simple. And that maybe it's not a great thing if we don't know the beliefs that each of us carry. I think the invitation in our divided world is to recognize that it isn't that simple. In fact, maybe some of us carry beliefs about the world that we are kind of scared of sharing because we think everybody might assume something about us. And so we don't ever share any of those beliefs. I think sometimes we use the word assume, but I think what assume is just a nicer, more gentler word than judge. That we don't want to say what we really believe, or that we have questions or we need clarity because we're afraid of being judged. And so we kind of live with this awkwardness. I'm just going to assume everybody's a Democrat in here and just be okay with it and go on. Maybe that's not the best posture. Maybe Jesus is saying, maybe have space for questions. Antithetical to judgment is curiosity. And I think, what does it mean to hold space for the questions and the gray in our lives? For people to say, I don't know. I really have serious questions. And for us to not say, whoa, who are you to believe that? Like, do you know the statistical data? Probably not the best way to start a conversation. But what if we're curious? What if our understanding of the world is shaped and molded by our ability to listen and to struggle together with the beliefs and ideals that we each carry? Martin Luther King Jr. said these words: I am convinced that men hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. And they don't know each other because they don't communicate with each other. And they don't communicate with each other because they are separated from each other. I think so much of our lives is captured by fear. And many of us hold back, especially in times where a dialogue would be really helpful, because we fear that someone's going to judge us. Judge the questions. Label us. Or even reject us. Did you hear what so-and-so said? Do you hear what so-and-so believed? Did you hear that we have a Republican in the church? We didn't know. If, I think that sign is back there, this is truly a safe space, which I feel like it's an ideal, then it has to be a curious space. A space for which people can come in wherever they are at on their journey and have the space to ask questions, which is one of our values of curiosity, and to be received. There is a reason that over and over in Scripture that God says, do not fear. Do not fear. Do not fear. Because the kind of space that God holds is one that is big enough to hold our curiosity, to hold our questions, to hold the spaces for which we are gray, and also holds the space of recognizing that not all of us see the world in the same light. It isn't a matter of whose side is Jesus on. Is Jesus on my side? Is Jesus on their side? Because our understanding of Jesus is that we know lives in a more complex world that understands that people change and we change. And who we are and what we believe today might not be what we believe tomorrow. I oftentimes forget that there's a lot of things to me that make this church special. But in most churches, the congregation does not talk to the pastor after they preach a sermon. And I oftentimes forget that that's, like, if you're new walking in, like, that's different. But I want to invite you to reflect with me. Are there questions or reflections that you have? Is there anything I said that stayed with you? Or there's like 4 questions in this. again, we want to thank you for listening today to the Storied Church podcast. We really hope that we get to meet you soon. And again, you can visit us at storiedchurch.org, or you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We hope that you have a wonderful week, and we hope to meet you soon. Hi everyone, it's Jason again, and before you go today, I just wanted to take one moment of your time. Maybe you are a regular attender at Storied Church, or somebody that has found our podcast and you're just listening and you find it valuable. I just want to ask a huge favor. Our church is located in North Carolina, Alamance County, and we are one of the only open and affirming, reconciling, progressive, whatever word you want to label on that church here in Alamance County. And so we're just a really important voice of hope in this place. Every organization, including ours, takes funding. And the church has changed, and so we're trying to be creative in our funding. But I know it's a different ask, that especially if you don't live here in North Carolina. But if you would support us or consider supporting us with a one-time gift or even a monthly gift, it would mean the world. And thank you so much for even considering. You can give by going to storiedchurch.org/give. I hope you do. We would love your partnership and your friendship. Thanks again.